we got to understand that it is not a name and fame situation, and that each one of us is impacted by violence. You can't sit in your house in one of these residential communities and think that you're not impacted. You just go out, you go to the cinema, you go town, you go different places. We do not want to get to a point where you can't just walk to, you can't revolt looking over your shoulder. You do not want to get to a point where you sit down in your big corporate office, with your big desk and your big staff, and you hear that your child no get stabbed, somebody rob your child because your child is to school with the same people that you don't want to support. That's why it's important for corporate Barbados to get involved in this, because they are the ones who will also suffer. We are part of this society together. It's not a them and us. When people just feel that way, that's not the case. We gotta walk boat, we gotta drive boat. You don't want situations you can't walk or drive the way in this beautiful paradise that we have. Me and my family, we would have been, let's say, victims of violence. I would have lost my sister tragically. And you know, that experience was extremely hurtful, extremely painful. It really, really damaged my family tremendously. But coming out of that situation, for us to really grow, there had to be a degree of forgiveness. There had to be a degree of tapping into who we are as individuals, because you can find yourself grieving for extensive periods of time, you know, and getting to reflect on what my sister would have wanted and how she would have lived her life. You know, these things really, really changed me personally. It really shifted my perspective. And I would say that it shifted my perspective in such a way that I am now involved in a career that I never even thought. My name is Fabian Sargent. I am a professional social worker and the founder and president of Men Empowerment Network Support. Now, we are an organization that focuses on the social and emotional empowerment of men. And the reason for that is that, you know, men are the main perpetrators of violence based on research. And there are many families across Barbados who have been hurt by the hands of men. And, you know, we believe that if we can get to the mind, you know, the emotions, help men to understand what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and how to respond to these emotions, then we will have a lot less violence. We will have a lot less families who go through traumatic situations, and we would be in a better place throughout society generally. No one wants to experience a bad situation, but we can take our adversities and we can use those adversities to really, really help this entire situation of violence within our communities, violence that we face as a people, violence that exists within households, you know. And it is a process. It is not an easy process. So support is extremely important, you know, and we have to be willing to accept that support. We have to be willing to talk to people about what we are going through. We have to be willing to say, well, I am hurting, because traditionally we've not been taught how to deal with grief and frustration and hurt, pain, resentment, anger, you know, hatred. Those things only create baggage for us people. And if you don't get rid of that hate, you know, for me, and I know like my mother and my family, my mother don't carry hatred in her heart. You know, my mother is a very, very, very forgiving woman. And when I hear my mother talk about forgiving people who would have done her some real heinous things, you know, it sets an example for me and all of my other siblings and family to follow. And it is because of situations like that we are able to move forward. Not that you forget, can't ever forget, but you do not have that baggage that weights you down and that impacts your emotions and even your health generally. Blood pressure go up, sugar go up, you know, sometimes mental illness can kick in because you're not managing your mental health well. So many things can go wrong. Violence is a demon, sorry to put it that way, right? And we gotta get to a point where we can't allow the demon to win. We gotta step out of it. We gotta wrestle this violence to the ground and say, look, you cannot win. That is what it really is for me. It's about growth. It's about not allowing violence to get into my life. I don't get involved in conflict at all. I mean, I'm married, and my wife could tell you, whenever there's a noise, I move, I run. If I gotta get my car, if I gotta go somewhere, if I gotta go put my earpods in my ear and watch something, I don't get involved in noise. There's a pause, and when you think that you're to an emotional level where you can think straight, then you can have that conversation. I run far from conflict, because conflict in many instances leads to violence. We as a people, we need to learn how to manage that conflict. And that is exactly what I do personally in terms of managing my conflict, understanding my emotions, understanding that I have choices in terms of my behaviors, and understanding how to connect with people in my space. It is very difficult for families to really get themselves out of that situation. I liken it to standing in a bucket and trying to lift it. You know there's a situation, you can't get it. But external support is very important. Now, there are skill sets that are extremely important that you cannot learn at school, that must be learned within the social environment, and it is the responsibility of the wider village, the people in the space, to provide that mentorship, guidance, and support for our young people. You just can't be having a conversation about the shootings and the stabbings and all the bad things that are happening in schools. And while that conversation has its place, because it's important to understand what's happening now, we also must understand how do we then move out and get out of this cycle? How do we get ourselves to a position of empowerment? How do we get ourselves back on a track of progress and development as a society? And each one of us has to play its part. While we work with men and provide support for men, if you really want to make a solid impact with men across Barbados, we definitely have to start from the time that they are boys. So we have a Safe Zone program where we work with boys between the age of 12 and 18 years old. And that really also is to provide that same social and emotional environment for men and for these boys. Now, boys traditionally have been socialized not to talk, not to share, not to express themselves. That has been normalized within the family, within the households, where boys are not expected to feel. You get beat and say, go outside. You get licked and you say, shut up in here. So you're not expected to feel pain. You're not expected to talk. You want to say something, you feel as a man. Why should you be talking in here? So we provide the space for these boys to talk, share, in such a way that they can grow and develop into men who are emotionally intelligent, who can become way better fathers than the ones that went before, way better husbands, workmates, and family members generally. So our whole idea is to empower boys and men across Barbados. And while you may be having men being perpetrators of violence, and boys also perpetrating this violence within schools and communities, I see that as a front to a deeper issue. This is always a type of response to something that's happening with them, some type of need. Men can go and rob because they ain't got the money. They can go and sell drugs because they're trying to make a living. They don't have CXCs, they don't have qualifications, so they may end up out there. A lot of them are angry because of childhood traumas, things that happen within their households. A lot of them were abused physically, verbally, So when we sit down and we look at this violence, I always like to say that we need to focus on the root of these behaviors, because a lot of these young boys are looking for mentors. They are looking for positive role models. A child don't born bad. It is the environment that creates that. And that is where the emphasis, I keep talking about the root. The emphasis needs to be on that initial environment for that child, even though it may be a bad environment. You know, I grew up in an environment that people may consider a bad environment. I grew up in Nassau Street. I went to school at St. Ambrose Primary School, proud alumni of that school. I got confirmed at St. Ambrose Parish Church, Anglican Church. And I'll tell you, I don't think that I am a product of some of the behaviors some people link to the community. And that community has produced some fantastic individuals. But you know what was critical? Was the fact that there were community organizations that got my attention. It was the church. I got involved in different things with school. There were people who reached out to teach and guide me as an individual, you know. I got involved in so much volunteer activity. And doing that, you meet people, you see a different life. You get to realize where my entire world have been focused in this centralized space, that there's a lot more to life than the negativity and the violence that we see. I remember every single night, I used to hear somebody get beat in front of my house. Man get shot in my yard. People get robbed. Somebody couldn't go to none of the nightclubs in the neighborhood that's surrounding the Bay Street area. When 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody get beat and somebody get robbed. Every day I could hear it. Every day like clockwork, you know? But that did not consume my life. At least, I can't say didn't. I think that the environment then, that my parents then created for me to move me from that environment is what really helped me to not go down that negative road. And that's why the message I really want to get to families and parents and society generally. While you may not be able to directly impact a household, there's a saying that the village is raised a child. But if we take the concept of a village, literally we'll be looking at a physical space. But understand that the village is every space that a child is engaged or interacts with. Child may go down the road, you see a child doing something that is wrong. There's nothing wrong if that child takes to you and you say, well, listen, I think that you need to do something a little different. Maybe you can dress better. You don't need to behave this way. But we've reached a stage now that nobody don't talk to nobody, child. Nobody don't give good advice. People think that I can't talk to nobody, child, because they can get on bad. I can't correct this body. So if we have that, then we'll have a continuous generation of children, of young men being violent, being, you know, hostile. And that is what we want to change. The entire society has to take responsibility and recreate this concept of the village. And when I speak about the village in a very physical sense, young people in this modern day, in this contemporary environment, live on the internet. I think that we as a society have not engaged the internet the way we should. We should be involved in the games, the discards, and all the online platforms that these young people are engaged in. And when there are persons out there trying to influence them in a negative way, we should have platforms to counteract that negativity and put positive information out there. We should have chat rooms that young people can go in and ask some positive questions about career choices, about sports, about health and well-being, about anything under the sun that should be guided by people within our space. Not that they go on the internet and somebody somewhere in Japan or China or the US or Europe answering them. How do we take charge of the young people in our space to change this narrative of violence and hate and crime by tapping into all the different spaces that our young people engage, you know? I must give kudos to a number of the government programs. I know the Ministry of Youth has tremendous programs across the communities in Barbados. You know, there's digital film and media. I mean, there's connections with the Barbados Community College and all the tertiary institutions. There's so many programs, but programs, government cannot do it alone. We have situations where a number of young men are victims. When I say victims, they are victims of circumstance, victims of their own environment. Oftentimes they have uncles, fathers who would have went before them, who would have engaged in a lot of criminal activity. And because an environment of violence and hatred and negativity have been created, it makes it so difficult for these new generations to really, I guess, conceptualize or even accept that there is a different way. And this is where now society, this is where now civil society, government, the education system, this is where social services, we all know have to chip in terms of trying to change the narrative, trying to change the mindset. And changing mindsets is not easy because you have to understand that the environment influences behavior. And even though you may have a child come into a particular space and you teach them something, he's still going back to that environment. So everything must be all-encompassing. We have to really focus on the family. How do we empower families? How do we get in families to understand the importance of being their brother's keeper? How do we get families starting to love each other again? How do we get families working with each other? How do we get families understanding the role of mentorship? For those boys, those young people who we consider fall through the cracks or get away, you know, every one of us has an interest. Every one of us have strengths. And for anything to work, even for those persons who we think fall through the cracks, they are interested in something. This is where the social net must be strong, because while you may have those that fall through, we still need to have something to capture them. We cannot allow them to just fall and leave them by the wayside. So we need to have programs, we need to have projects, we need to have people that will serve their purpose by identifying and building on their strengths. You know, you may have a young boy who drop out, who for some reason, he didn't do well in school at all. He fight bad, he didn't interested in the sports, he didn't interested in anything. But you know what? This boy may have got an interest in fishing. But the boy they pay him the money because fishermen, the family got people that quote unquote in good jobs. So the boy didn't want he fishing, but the boy interested in fishing. The boy interested in building things. He interested in carpentry and joinery. He interested in art. There's a lot of people, there's a perception that you can't make the money at art, and there's some professions that we frown upon. And oftentimes when you see people quote unquote falling through the cracks, it's not that they're falling through the cracks, it's that they're not interested in the mainstream things that everybody interested in. You may find a boy that's interested in bending wire. We could do a bending wire. You know, you see boys with little things fidgeting in the hand, and we call that a problem. If we can really focus on the strengths and the interests of these same boys that we think fall through the cracks, then you give them the opportunity to redirect that negative energy, that behaviors that we think that are not conducive with good development, in a space that is positive for them. And that's where we can't leave them. We just have to be good enough to identify what their strengths are. We got boys that are good with talking, troublesome, but maybe good with speaking. They may be good with selling things. You know how much boys get sent home for selling lollipops in schools and Jolly Ranchers and told, this against rules, so go home for 2 weeks or whatever. What's that? These boys are building their entrepreneurial spirit. So then, if I like selling things, I don't really like, I try to support myself because mommy don't got money, daddy don't got money, the boy give me money, and I can't do that. And you stop me, well, I get rebel. So therefore, I am now responding to a need that is not being met. So I will be deviant, or what you consider as deviant. All it is that I just want to do my thing and you don't allow me to do it. A lot of men do not have qualifications. So let me get a little more specific. There was some research done by the Criminal Justice and Research Unit, I think it was in 2017, subject to correction, on the prison population. And coming out of that study, there were, I think that study, they interviewed, there was just around 450 prisoners that were involved in that study. 72% of those men in prison were reported not to have any formal qualifications, you know, CXCs, etc. And 38% or 32% of that 72, they were expelled, you know. There was some research which also they explored the school population. And out of the 21 secondary schools where the research had about, I think there was just over 2,100 students were part of that, you had just about 3,200 suspensions. And most of those suspensions were boys. So I say all that to say that we have to look, when we're speaking about the root, how our boys are educated, how our boys are treated, and how our boys are able to connect with academia. You know, we have a situation where there are a large number of young men who cannot read and write, who cannot read in a system where we say education is free at point of delivery. And a lot of these boys are giving the school system tremendous challenges. So when we want to talk about the root, we have to look at our education system, what is happening within schools, how our boys are being educated, what is happening in the classrooms, because it can also be a great degree of frustration. You can imagine sitting in a classroom, I don't understand what's going on the board, but you're expected to sit there, you know. We have a number of boys who go to school on mornings without breakfast. How do you expect them to function in the classroom? That speaks to the economic situations within the home. What's happening at home? What's happening with mommy and daddy? What's the social environment like within the community? We have families fighting. We have a situation in Barbados where there's a great degree of incest and rape within families. And when we think of rape, we often think of women and females. But there are boys who get interfered with too. And a lot of these boys are expected to go on as normal. We are not addressing the root cause of the social issues within our society because they are painful, they are hurtful. You know, when we sit down and we say that boys are hard-ears, they ain't care, they ain't no good, no. I, as a social worker, understand that there is a reason behind every behavior that we see. And then all of these things contribute to the same childhood traumas that a lot of these criminals, and they call them criminals because they're involved in criminal activity. A lot of these criminals manifest and display those behaviors that they display are a response to these same childhood traumas that they went through when they were children, whether it was at school, a teacher telling you that you ain't no good, you ain't ever learn nothing, you can be a criminal like your father or your uncle, or you're gonna be like that man there, up to through adolescent phase, you're going to secondary school, a teacher, somebody, your family tell you, man, you want this and you want that, a lot of negativity, these boys then harness and they manifest a lot of the behaviors then in adulthood, especially when they get that extra support. The block don't turn back nobody. The block don't turn back nobody. You understand? And not that the block is a bad thing or a bad place. It's that that's the place where a lot of men congregate. They have a shared vision oftentimes because it's an institution, but it's what has happened when you get there that creates or make it bad or negative. But there are some positive places that you can call blocks. There are a lot of young men who have been through a very, very, very difficult time and who would have been some serious perpetrators of violence and who have successfully come out of it, who are now model citizens. I know there was a guy who was interested in fixing things. And nobody never want to pay the guy no money. He would always fight and create havoc in the community. He would, I used to get so much phone calls, issues at school, and everybody want me a mechanic. So I connect him with a workshop. That occupied his attention because that is what he was interested in. No, he's a mechanic, first class mechanic, because he took that, and because he had so much passion and interest in that area, he then went back and do a little studies. He got involved in Polytechnic, and then he got his certification, and he moved on and on and on. Now he can look back and smile at the days that he, quote unquote, was giving trouble. All that happened was that he was seeking attention. He was looking for attention that he wasn't getting home or any other place. And because he was able to channel that energy in a place where he had interest, it shifted the direction that his life was going in. Oftentimes, we do not have these situations that shift the attention, and we just have these young men and boys just going down the highway, just going down the long road, and then they're meeting all types of criminals and people that do bad things, and no one wants to say, look, come and go left, or come and go right. That is what we need. Nobody in Barbados, and I would like to end with that, nobody in Barbados. It is the environment, it is the people, the space, the things that they're exposed to that influence their brain, influence their behaviors, influence their emotions. And they then respond to all of these things. And because they don't know how to respond to it, they jump at the first thing or first person that make them feel as if, I am somebody. And many instances, that person is not a good person. So the responsibility lies on everybody's shoulder. We all are hurt people. We all go through our traumas. We go through our challenges. But we must take personal responsibility. We must be intentional about the way we want to proceed, we want to progress, the way we want to elevate and excel as a people, as a nation, and what it is we really want to see for the generations that's supposed to be coming behind us. We have to really create a real good foundation for them to springboard, or not, we can get all in a space that we really don't want to get all in.